Welcome to the Aegance Offscript Podcast, where we talk to industry leaders who share their stories, insights, and lessons, unfiltered and unscripted. I'm your host, Lawrence, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Ahmed Kader, the Operations Director at CrystalForge Technology. Now, CrystalForge Technologies is a relatively young, high-potential firm that helps heavy industry and mining operations transform raw data into actionable decision intelligence. They lean heavily into the co-creation, human augmentation, and change management space to make sure that those tools actually integrate and deliver value on site. Ahmed, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Lawrence. Thanks for the fantastic intro. Yeah, quite pleased to be here.
Amazing, Ahmed. I positioned CrystalForge to a certain degree, but I'm sure you can provide us with a little bit more context around what exactly it is that you guys do.
Yeah, look, so I mean, there's a quite a wide range of things that we actually end up doing. So maybe what I should do is give you an idea of what our capabilities are. Typically, we handle everything from hardware manufacturing through to data hosting, through to data availability, quality, information generation, reporting, and up into insights, AI, and machine learning. And ultimately, it's quite a broad set of services. The context is that making industrial decisions is particularly difficult. Well, I would say making good industrial decisions is particularly difficult. It's not just about the physics and the chemistry and, the kinetics and all of those technical things. It's also about the mechanical side. It's also about the agitation and pumping and piping. And then the people side, the humans that are interacting with these systems and the chemicals that you're adding. And so an industrial facility is something of a cacophony of different flavors of skill working together to orchestrate this beautiful thing that you're trying to make gold out of rocks. And so we realized that a vast proportion of the organogram in the mining industry, because myself and a lot of the other leaders in the business are chemical engineers, industrial professionals. And we've been working in industry and running plants our whole career. And, the software that we're using there is not of the modern era, to put it lightly. And adoption often fails, and things are generally quite nebulous in this industry because of the complexity. And so this service offering seeks to take that chaos and produce some semblance of clarity from it by taking the data out of all of these very different skill sets, operational nuance into consideration, and domain knowledge, and building up a business operating system where an industrial facility now runs, think about it, your laptop that you have in front of you right now, right? You've got some hardware, you've got some software, you've got, a whole bunch of different things. You don't try to write machine code to run your laptop, do you? You don't try to write hexadecimal. You use an operating system. So similarly, when managing these large industrial facilities, and manufacturing and mining and other industries fall into that, as well as some warehousing and, in general, distribution and complexity in business from a technical standpoint, dealing with that requires some sort of operating system. And that's what we build in a nutshell.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's crystal clear. And when you think about your role as the operations director, what's the real North Star for you? Is it efficiency? Is it adoption? Is it innovation? Or is it something broader, like maybe it's trust and impact?
Yeah, I would say that trust is very important, particularly internally, where we orchestrating, the magic in the background. And that's primarily because we use a chain of trust management style, if that makes sense. It's just a term we've come up with. But the reason why trust is the North Star is because skill is directly tied to trust, right? So if you know that someone can do something, that means you trust that they can, and therefore it also allows you to lean on your people because when you think about managing or orchestrating people through trust, it means that you are aware that you're not necessarily as good as they are at certain things, because why else would you have to trust them, right? And perhaps you don't have the time, and perhaps you don't have the bandwidth, and perhaps whatever the case might be. But the point, though, is that at the heart of the organization of CrystalForge is a human-centric ideology. We're developing technology, but it's a humanistic approach. So directing our operations is very much a case of directing the people that make the magic happen. So yeah, hope I've answered that question.
Yeah, no, you absolutely have. And where do you draw the line between operational excellence and experimentation?
We don't, because they're not different. So if you think about the practice of operational excellence, right, and the principles, especially in a manufacturing context or mining context or heavy industry context, you're talking about lean, you're talking about Six Sigma, minimization of waste principles, and process-driven thinking. And all of these sort of paradigms around operational excellence are actually just the exploit arm of the experiment process. So you first experiment, you first ideate, you first conceptualize, and only once you've defined a feasible strategy for implementation do you go into the operational excellence paradigm of waste minimization. Now, that being said, it's more a case of resource dedication. So what resource do you dedicate? So you don't draw a line, but you partition your resource allocation. That's at least my strategy. And the reason for that is because in today's environment, where technology moves as fast as it does, failure to intentionally experiment, is a major disadvantage to any business. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Makes complete sense. And are there any signals that you keep a close eye on that tells you that the operational strategy is actually working?
Yeah. So when you think about implementing a solid operational strategy, it's not on the timescales to which we are comfortable. So a lot of the time, you've got to think more in the time dimension, because you've got planning that's occurring on a multi-year scale. Okay, so how do you rationalize the outputs of those plans in a long-term fashion, where you don't necessarily know what next year or the next 2 years or the next 3 years are going to be? You have historical information, so we treat it more like a trading problem. There are leading signals and lagging signals, and the lagging signals lag behind the implementation curve, whereas the leading signals indicate if the strategy needs pivoting, or where it needs pivoting. And ironically, or funny enough, and this is something that I actually haven't told anyone, but the best indicator for whether or not your operational strategy is working, in my opinion, is if your engineers are having fun or not. If you've got stressed out, crunched down, under the pump engineers all the time, because the reason I say that is because they are the designed bottleneck of the organization, right? When you design an organization, and your operational strategy must feed into organizational design, obviously, you need to have that tie into the organizational design. So you design it so that the engineers are the bottleneck, right? Because they define how much work can be outputted with their AI and agent assistance, obviously, but they define that. However, if the people at the rock face and this is what I've observed in industry as well, if people at the rock face doing the work aren't enjoying themselves, that means there are multiple failures around the process of how work is done, so that someone who decided to dedicate their life to doing that thing isn't happy doing it. That's ridiculous. So that for me is, if you had to choose just one indicator, it's that. Because these people find joy in their work, and if you manage to suck the joy out of it, then you're doing something very wrong, and you need to pivot immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it's a really good way to look at it, and maybe it's a softer signal, but one
Yes.
that really has a big knock-on effect, right?
Yeah, and I'm not telling you about the usual ones, because we all know how Google works. But this is one that was very surprising to me, because there was a time where our engineers were quite stressed out for a period, and we pivoted an operational strategy around how to make that better, and the knock-on effect was that client relationship was better, client service provisioning was better, time to value was better. Just the general sort of mood and culture around. And we didn't necessarily only resource up. That's not the answer. Don't just throw money at the problem. Be creative. Think about, okay, well, we went into the process of how these guys were context switching so many times during, let's say, a typical hour of work. So switching context is like jarring to your brain. You're working on something, and then you have to quickly pivot to work on something different. And that might be baked into your workflow, baked into your job description. Part of the reason why we found ourselves in such a situation is because the roles in AI aren't very well defined. And we had people like, this is the guy that manages the knowledge of the models. Like, that's your job title. You know what I mean? So recently, Gartner's put out some new job titles that they've come up with, which I was quite happy with. Knowledge engineers, decision engineers, model validation engineers, and a few other AI specific roles. And because of the muddiness around the roles, and we were defining those roles in production, as it were, you know. And it's only when we dived into the process of how work gets done, and figured out that this is actually a separate role. You now have, or this is actually no. That someone someone's whole job should be to look after this particular thing. And that's why I talk about organizational design and assessing, the nature of, and then selecting the right people. Obviously, this is all predicated on the fact that we have a very tight hiring policy.
You've alluded to the idea of human-centric AI being sort of core to CrystalForge, and it's sort of built on that idea. What does that philosophy mean to you in practice?
So, human-centric AI means using technology for what technology is good for, but not losing sight of the fact that technology is ultimately something that services humanity. And so, the thing about AI is that it's very horizontal in nature. It's able to be applied to multiple domains in multiple different ways. It's able to be scaled in that way. However, we know about hallucination problems. We know about the fact that there does appear to be some level of drift in the models. And there are a lot of things that you need to really think about very carefully and be very human-centric in your approach. That's where it comes from. And what does it mean practically? What it means practically is more human validation checkpoints than you really need. It means keeping the human in the loop, even when technically we can remove the human from the loop. And the reason behind this is because just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. And that's a very simple, I mean, it's almost like the first principle of engineering. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not about can you, it's about should you. Feasibility is where, dreams go to die, as they say. Uh, but and the other aspect of this is that the AI industry needs to be protected from itself, because there is a price bubble in the AI field at the moment, where the valuations are far exceeding the value. And what we strive to achieve by being human centric and value centric is to say that whatever we implement with AI, we're trying to augment the humans rather than trying to replace them. We're trying to enhance them. And that paradigm and that philosophy and that approach leads to excellent adoption, even in very challenging situations, like industrial operations. Industrial operations probably have the worst IT adoption rate of any industry, I would guess. And then the other thing that human centricity is about is thinking long and hard about the problem of what should be done by humans and what should be done by AI. That means, you may take a bit more time thinking about that problem than you otherwise would, and we try to do that intentionally. And the reason for that is every time there was a bubble in a technological sense, the bubble is in the price, not in the value, right? So if we stay anchored to value and we stay anchored to humans, then we know that this is a sustainable model into the future. Removing humans from certain activities is a good idea. And those activities, we tend to try to find out what the humans dislike most, okay, and remove those difficult, annoying, tedious activities. And then also in industrial operations, we find human teams very stretched, because an industrial facility is all about the cost benefit ratio or the cost to value ratio for that particular product. One of the biggest costs on any industrial facility is human resourcing. Typically, organograms are quite thin and people are quite stretched. There's always more that the team wants to do. In my experience, there's always more that the team can do, but they don't have the bandwidth, or they don't have the time, or their time is being taken up by other menial tasks that could otherwise be taken care of by AI. So it's being practical, and then it's being cognizant of what humans enjoy. It's being cognizant of what AI is good at. And then attempting to implement a strategy where we are sure of adoption, and we are sure that we're going to translate our implementations to value.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that adoption note, do you find that your clients immediately get the value of the approach, or do you have to prove it through some sort of outcome? I mean, is there resistance in the field to sort of the human-centric AI?
It depends. So there are times where there is resistance, and the resistance tends to be less about the AI and more about the data management system. So we don't really implement AI on an industrial facility the same way you would implement it onto a generic, business, because there's complexity in the operation. So there's an underlying data management system that manages the operational data, and that's the business that CFT was in before AI was the buzzword of the day. And so the data management system that underpins this is really powerful, enriches and contextualizes the data, and that allows the AI then to be very effective. So a lot of the time, resistance comes from when you're implementing a comprehensive data management system, it exposes a lot of things. So, I mean, if there's there's nowhere to hide once the data is in a unified single source of truth data management system. And that's where most of the resistance comes in, and it's usually like nefarious actors that are taking advantage of the business that would resist. But from internal perspective of the business themselves, usually adoption is very good, and that's primarily because the approach is a co-creation approach rather than here I know better than you about your operation. I'm going to tell you how to run your operation. No, the guy working on the operation knows that operation better than you. Um, so it's a co-created, tailor-made approach where everything is customized to the need of the business. And what that allows us to do is to basically remove almost all adoption barriers because the software is now fitting the business rather than the business trying to fit the software. So this requires specialized skill sets and a very deep knowledge about industrial facilities as well as AI, IT systems, data management systems, and so on. But that's the team that we have, and this is the offering that we offer. So adoption tends to be taken care of by definition almost. But yeah, where we get a lot of resistance is if there's anything that anyone is trying to hide from the business, usually it is uncovered in the data management system implementation. So that tends to be a little bit bumpy. But after that, it's fine.
And scaling from a proof of concept to sort of your day-to-day reality is where most analytics programs tend to stall. In your experience, what's been the toughest barrier in making that jump from POC to reality?
So one of the things that is a great failure of most analytics applications, in my opinion, is that there's no ecosystem by which you interact with analytics in a contextual way to what you're trying to do. So let me unpack it a little bit. So for example, I work on a platinum mine. I've done that before, so I can talk about it. I work on a platinum mine and I'm trying to do analytics. My analytics program is asking me about all the cleaning methods and how I would like to model things and so on and so forth. But it doesn't have an anomaly detection model to identify if the sensor data coming out of the plant is meaningful or not. And so even though I can do analytics, how certain can I be of the outcome of my analytics? So that's why I talk about a data management system, right? It's because when people are doing analytics inside of a CFT business operating system, they have the benefit of a data management system, which is managing the quality and the availability of that data such that whatever analytics you do, you can be certain of, at least to the extent that the business needs to be certain about things, obviously. And then similarly, you've got a virtual performance center or business OS interface, which allows you within your department to share those analytics. It allows you to store different iterations of analytics. It allows you to interact with these things in a way that is seamless and in a way that is shareable and human. And this is also part of the human centricity conversation, because do you know that about 100% of businesses are staffed by humans? And so if the human beings don't work well together and don't have a mechanism to interact seamlessly, then there isn't much point doing anything else, because that's the actual heart of the business, right? And you can't police people into doing a good job, but you can engineer an environment where they enjoy doing that. And that's what we do. So to me, it's not really about the analytics themselves. It's about how do you interact with them? What's the experience, you know? And how much power is in your hands? Then the other thing about the CFT business model is that we implement these business operating systems, but we don't leave unless they tell us to, which no one has yet. But I guess it's only a matter of time. Yeah, so once we implement the operating system, the business has options about how much support it needs going forward. And when an industrial operation changes a pipe or changes a pump or moves a reactor or whatever, our software and our modeling shifts to reflect the operational change. So we're putting humans first, we're putting operations first, we're putting efficiency first, and it's at a system design level. So it's a lot less effort because the environment is conducive to the objective that you're trying to achieve.
You mentioned interaction is key, but what have you learned about actually embedding the decision systems so that they get used and not just installed?
So yeah, this one I can answer in probably one sentence. Um, Ask your client what they want, and then do that.
And
Right?
and do you find that yeah, that makes sense? I mean, but do you find that you need to have like a champion within the client's organization that sort of drives the change?
So usually I would say the reason I answer that question in that way is because I feel like the change management aspect and the organizational interaction aspect gets a lot of attention. But if you haven't scoped well, then it won't get used because it's missed the mark. And you got to be cognizant of who are you scoping with. Are you scoping with the CEO and then building a product for the operator in the field? Okay, you probably need to scope with the CEO in terms of the high level objectives of that product. But in terms of the user experience of the product, you need to scope with operators, supervisors, shift bosses, right? And I feel like a lot of the time, if you just do that work upfront, it lands really well. And it's literally the case of ask them what they want, ask them what will work for them. Go and put your boots on and go to the operation and talk to some people. Right? Crazy idea, and not like sort of in a structured, forceful meeting type of, haul these guys into the boardroom. And no, I mean, I've worked on industrial facilities my whole career. Walk into the control room, see how the guys are using their current mechanisms of control. They have something to do that job, otherwise the plant wouldn't run, right? It's obviously really inefficient. You go there, you make a connection, you start understanding the human problem. So you're solving a business problem, but adoption is solving a human. You need to get adoption. You don't need to solve a business problem. You need to solve a human problem. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, got you.
And
Absolutely.
so
That makes complete sense.
yeah, so what I find is if you put the focus on solving the human problem, you'll get adoption. And then if you put some focus on solving the business problem, you'll get sales. The problem is that adoption stalls because sales is more important than actually solving the problem in a lot of cases. And for us, because we try to cultivate long-term relationships with all of our clients, these are complex systems that can't just be maintained by anybody. And so we do cultivate a long-term relationship. So for us, the incentive is solve the problem as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, because you're going to deal with it a year down the line if it doesn't work, right? In 2 years down the line, whatever the case might be. Whenever there's a problem from the users, we also provide that support 24/7 to these operations. So we just, as a business, aligned our objectives with the objectives of the industrial facility. And by doing that, and then considering the business problem and the human problem, we get both sales and adoption seamlessly. So yes, there is a champion in the business. There's change management frameworks. There's usually two champions. One is from an IT perspective, as in change management in the IT domain, and then the other one is from an ops or technical perspective, so chemical, process engineering, mechanical, electrical, whatever. And that is, again, where your explore and exploit sort of dynamic comes in. As the production meeting happens or something happens, and there's some non-ideality that comes up, we can have that champion or that representative immediately be starting to think about what solutions could possibly solve that, could possibly assist. What could we do to help? A good example is one of our clients had a number of open cast mining operations that are spread across the bottom half of Africa, and they used Starlink for connectivity. Starlink was banned in South Africa, as you know. We had 3 days notice to write software for them to produce a workaround where it would compress the data, reduce the bandwidth, cache the data, beam through batches, do all sorts of different things. And by the time they moved over to the new paradigm where they didn't have connectivity, they still were able to run their operations. So this is a premium tier service for a premium tier client base of industrial operations. And I feel like the industry hasn't given industrial operations as much attention as they deserve. I mean, you and me can get an OS for our laptops, but you can't get one for your multi-billion-dollar plant. So yeah.
I'm quite keen to understand, how do you maintain accountability when outcomes are essentially shared?
Yeah, you'll find the human thread going through this whole business. And it's funny because we're a technology company primarily. And a lot of us have this passion for humans, which is strange, right? You'd think that the people implementing technology are up for replacing humans, but it's only when you intimately understand the technology that you realize its limitations and you understand why humans are so wonderful. And one of the things when you're talking about the adoption rates, as well as the level of friction that you get when you're co-creating a solution, is how you approach it. So again, you'll find approach being very forefront in our minds when we're crafting a strategy to do something. So accountability and outcomes, what does that mean? So when we think about accountability, we're saying that somebody has to be sort of on the chopping block for a particular outcome, right? And so we simply state that the scoping from the client side has to be about 80% correct. We have a mechanism for assessing how correct it is. We sign it off beforehand, but we don't scope on the level of sort of this button is here and that button is there and whatever. No. We actually specify those things in interactive workshops with the client. And with the power of AI, we can develop and design in real time almost, right? So that's now possible, where you can go through iterative workshops and show the client, this is, how do you feel about this design or that design? How do you feel about this mechanism? The other thing is that approach, you think about the information value chain. So the first thing that we do is we follow a decision intelligence framework, and that uses this concept of the information value chain. So the information value chain is, where does any data or information flow throughout the organization, whether it be through databases or to people or through sensors or through AI systems. We map this out, and we also map out the workflows associated with those things for each department. Usually, this leads to us understanding, and the client understanding as well, precisely where data needs to be, when it needs to be, and how it needs to look when it gets there. Then you have a ground truth sort of reference point for what the solution is going to look like. So if we establish ground truth for the solution and the outcomes that we expect from the solution, after that, we allow the client a lot of flexibility in how that implementation looks, if that makes sense. So we're following a rational decision-making framework. So we don't need 100 dashboards. We know that these are the decision makers. These 5 people need access to that information to make this decision every week. Okay. So we're not limiting our scope by artificially putting guardrails on our clients. We're limiting our scope by saying, let's look at what's rational for your business. Okay. Let's do that. We scope that in. It has to be 80% correct because we know it's never going to be 100%. And then we do it that way. It's a very different approach. It seems risky, right? And a lot of people are like, "Ooh, I would never do that." But the other thing is we doing results as a service. So it's not about how much work it takes me to do what you need. It's about how much I told you it'll cost for you to get that need satisfied. And I think that's where software is moving, or that's where this whole industry is moving, because we need to anchor ourselves to value and we need to anchor ourselves to outcomes. So if you can't stand behind your outcomes, then yeah, your client should be upset.
Speaking about value and proving ROI, I mean, I'd imagine that in industries like mining or manufacturing, selling anything is not a quick win, but selling analytics or AI, just the same. It's not a quick win. How do you frame the ROI and risk so that the decision makers can actually lean into it?
Okay. So we have a discovery process that we run through. So it's effectively a process for solution design, as well as like a mini scoping study on a high level, identifying pain points, and figuring out where. So we don't believe in digital transformation, by the way. We talk about digital augmentation. And the reason for that is because we believe that you should only implement technology where you need it. Again, simple statements. I'm not saying anything complicated or very interesting. It's just if you don't need it, maybe don't implement it, right? And so part of the discovery is figuring out where should CFT touch this business to try and help improve things. And can we do that at all? And if we can do that, how much money would they make as a result of that? So that's where our industrial expertise and financial modeling and all of those type of skill sets come in very handy. Because by the end of the discovery, the client has a business case, which they can take to an investment committee and stand behind the figures. They have a scoped in roadmap to say, these are the pain points that we think you should solve as a phase 1. And this is how much that'll cost, and this is how long it'll take. So you know how much value you're getting, you know what it'll cost, you know how long it'll take, and you know roughly what the solution design will be after a month of CFT working on your plant. So we have to walk around the plant, we have to meet people, we have to get a sample of data, we have to run that through our models. There's a lot of work involved, but typically once you've done the discovery, we can then show that the value generated by any system that we implement should be at least 10 times the cost of that same system. If it's not, we won't do the project. As in CFT won't do the project. We might refer them to someone else who's willing to, if they really want it, or we might even do it if they really, really want to do the project. But typically it's not worth our while to do a project where someone doesn't get 10 times the value out of the system implementation. So this is where I'm saying really tie yourself to the value, really tie yourself to the outcomes, and commit to actually delivering that for the clients. The strategy is to leverage the power of AI and this new technological wave that we're going on to deliver best-in-class outcomes with rapid iteration, rapid experimentation on our side. And a typical industrial facility does not have a team of experts that can do this kind of work. And it's very expensive for them to try and do this individually as well. Um, you know, and so we are able to centralize research and development. We're able to focus on industrial problem solving with this technology and our skill set. And that means that by the time we get to the client, most of the time, we already know how to solve that problem. One of the partners in the business is Paul Harvey. He's got 30 years of experience in the mining field. Our head on the IT side has about 35 years of experience in cybersecurity, telecoms, information technology. So we're getting, you're getting the benefit of the type of skill set that that wouldn't typically be found in an industrial operation, except for maybe at a very high level. And you're getting the ability to scale that knowledge and wisdom of thinking, retain organizational knowledge. And there's a whole ecosystem built around this in terms of how you run an industrial operation. And it's all geared towards delivering the value, delivering the outcomes that the industrial sector needs. And one of the reasons why, I know I'm rambling on a bit, but one of the reasons why I'm passionate, or we are passionate about this, is because we find that our systems create sort of first principles value. You know what I mean? It's really like there was less copper yesterday and we did something and now there's more copper. It's a very fundamental value add to the world, and it doesn't actually cost too much. That's why we use the 10-to-1 ratio. So if we're creating, let's say, $100 million of copper in additional revenue, then the cost of the system should be no more than $10 million, because otherwise you're eroding the value that you just created. So part of the business model is to say that the value being created belongs to the client. We take our share of the value to support our organization and grow and all of these cool things, but we need to set ourselves up to be efficient so that this ratio works out for us. So we're cascading this value cascade all the way from the client's value chain through the information ideas, through the idea of modeling data, and then into our organization. And when we started doing all of this sort of thinking to lay the foundations of these principles, it became quite clear that if we don't actively involve the human element, if we're not cognizant of that we will be irresponsible with how we implement technology. Because the possibilities are far more and far more varied than what we should be doing at the moment.
So, Ahmed, when you think 3 to 5 years out into the future, what's the next frontier that you want CrystalForge and your clients as well to reach?
So I think we have a process where they go through data availability, data quality, information generation, insight generation. A lot of clients always want insight generation, which is where AI and modeling and everything comes in. But in order to do it correctly, you have to do step 1, 2, and 3. And so a lot of what we're doing at the moment is getting the clients from sort of step 3 to step 4, where we've already implemented data availability, we've already implemented data quality, we've implemented information generation, and now they're getting to the exciting part of the AI and all that. When I think about 3 to 5 years out, one of the big gaps that I think we're probably going to be thinking about is hierarchical reasoning models and other model paradigms that are different from a generative pre-trained transformer in terms of architecture are showing a lot of promise. And particularly reasoning in latent space has become very interesting to me, and translation between latent and active space in reasoning. When I look into hierarchical models, I see like semantic kernel research is on the verge, and we've got the principles that show us that these hierarchical models can be more effective at certain domain specific tasks than LLMs. And in addition to that, they can be very, very cost effective. There's a paper that came out not 2 months ago talking about a hierarchical reasoning model doing pretty well on the ArcAGI benchmark, for example. And that was with just 1,000 examples and 27 million parameters. Whereas, for example, O3 or O4 mini, or even O4 mini high, does similar numbers on that benchmark, despite being, in the billions of parameters. So I think compute efficiency relative to insight or inference generation quality, that's the problem architecturally that a lot of people are starting to delve into and solve. And I think 3 to 5 years is probably the time horizon for that breakthrough. It might be sooner, it might be later. I don't know exactly. I'm not a fortune teller. But there is promise in the hierarchical reasoning model space and other like traditional RL. You think about, the Suttons of the world championing RL again out of a sort of brief hiatus. And it seems generative pre-trained transformers were the most economically viable model architecture to roll out. But everyone's starting to get the inclination in the industry that they're not necessarily the best at everything. And then also speciation. That's another thing I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to speciation in small models, small LLMs, because at the moment we've got these like general LLMs, and we do speciation or fine tuning in-house for specific use cases. But I feel like the more general purpose speciation of AI is going to introduce a lot of product opportunities, in the sense that someone could fine tune an AI for looking after spinach, for example, whatever. And in about 5 years, they probably will have done that. Someone would have probably done it by then, and it'd probably be based on, and this is the next thing, so I'm giving you 3, is the open source ecosystem. And so I'm looking forward to 3 to 5 years from now, where models have speciation, specialization inherent in them. People have had enough time to realize how to do this well. And we're thinking about reasoning and not just in the chain of thought paradigm, but also in the thinking fast and slow Daniel Kahneman type paradigm of hierarchical reasoning models, and then going into what does pure reinforcement learning give us, and all of these exciting technical developments are coming together at a time where the world is building up and gearing up thanks to LLMs. So a lot of people, in purists, don't like LLMs because they are the less elegant solution. Attention is all you need, the paper. But LLMs have given us the understanding that we need to up our energy infrastructure to facilitate this high rate compute, value generation. So I think 3 to 5 years, when we think about what's going on in industry and what will CFT be doing, is these are all things that we're planning to strategically leverage to provide a more holistic, more appealing offering. And we may even go, out of the industrial space at that point, because that allows us to be more generic and serve a wider range of audiences. It allows implementation costs to go down so that you can prepackage things automation becomes a lot more powerful. And so we'll be riding the wave of technological progress and innovation, productizing that and delivering that to clients in a way that adds value to their businesses. And one of the things that I need to tell you, because I think we're almost out of time, is we are making things that never existed before. And that's because this technology represents a fundamental shift in capability for software systems. The things that we've built and implemented in the last 6 months were impossible a year before we started working on it. And I don't mean it was hard. I mean impossible. The technology could not do that. And so now I think it's about keeping with the technology, implementing in production, being bold with experimentation, and figuring out how we can use this to drive human objectives.
Well, on that note, Ahmed, if our viewers and listeners want to connect with you and the broader team at CrystalForge, where's the best place to do that?
I think LinkedIn is a good channel. We're pretty active on LinkedIn. You can obviously catch us on the website. It's www.crystalforge.io. And, give us a call, schedule a meeting. We do a lot of speaking gigs, roadshows. We'll be at the Extraction 2025 conference in Arizona in November. If anyone's attending there, do come catch us. We're representing Southern Africa for AI and mining. And then I think in next year, Feb, Paul and myself and a bit of the other team members will be at the Indaba. We with a Canadian delegation who is spotlighting technology companies from South Africa and taking that to market in the industrial space in Canada. And we're doing a joint thing with them for next year. The organization's name is CIMA, CIMA, if anyone wants to look them up as well. And then, you can always catch us at SAIMM, the Southern Africa Institute for Mining and Metallurgy. We're associated with the Pretoria branch, quite good friends there. We're both chemical engineers. So you'll find us at those kind of things. And then I think on podcasts and these kind of interactions as well. And yeah, you can reach out directly to us via email, anything else. We're quite open to conversations and explorations. We've had psychologists around, we've had security people around, we've had doctors, and all sorts of different people coming in and bringing us really challenging, complex technical problems in their fields and wondering, how could the latest and greatest state-of-the-art technology, digital technology today help me? If you have that idea, if you have that passion for that, and want efficiency and want to think about how to do things better and change the paradigm of work or business within your context, if you bring the context, we bring the skill and the infrastructure, and together we can get it done.
Amazing, Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been a very interesting conversation diving into CrystalForge Technologies, some of the operational processes that you put in place, talking about how you prove value, etc. And really look forward to seeing what comes next for CrystalForge. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lawrence, for having us. We really appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of the Aegance Offscript Podcast. If this conversation sparks something, a thought, a question, or a new way of seeing your own business, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.